Hawks talking squawk. Saving my J-Dub homie from the gang he was affiliated with. Let's soar back in time to late 2003. Not so much late 2003, maybe. Yeah, I would say late 2003, maybe possibly the summer of 2003. Where my young boy Mike wanted to turn his life over to Jehovah and become a dedicated publisher. The only problem was his loyalty and ties to a gang that he had been affiliated with over the past couple of years. Now, Mike and his foster brothers, they went to West Park congregation with their foster mother. And from what I heard, from stories I've heard from those guys myself, she treated them like shit. You know, she would do shit like not feed them if they weren't home by a certain time. She didn't really care if they rip and ran the streets or whatever. I mean, she would have them come to the Kingdom Hall, but, you know, a lot of kids, they would rebel, so they would stay out late on meeting nights so they purposely would not have to go to the meeting. But the only thing is if they missed the meeting, then they weren't fed that night. So they would have to fend for themselves. So my one young boy, Neek, he went to Brook with me. He was in the 9th grade when I was in my senior year at Brook. And it was really around that time I kind of took Neek under my wing. Now, Mike's a year younger than Neek. So at the time Mike was still in middle school, he was going to Shoemaker. And this was around the time they started rolling with this little West Philly gang. They called themselves the Black T-Shirt Gang. This was the era where baggy T-shirts and baggy jeans was the style. And they all had like the black T-shirts, the baggy black Jabot jeans, the black bubble coats and jackets, or whatever. So they called themselves the Black T-Shirt Gang. You know, I don't know what they were all involved in. But for what Mike told me, you know what I mean, they would go around robbing and jumping other drug dealers and other cats that were affiliated with gangs, like stealing, you know what I mean, breaking into people's houses and cars, you know what I mean, even stealing cars, you know what I mean, shit like that. So I remember when Neek when he first joined the gang, and he was telling me about it, and he was like, he didn't want to go to the hall, but he was tired of starving because the foster mom would starve him out whenever they wouldn't go to the meeting. So when he started running with the gang, making a little money on his own, he was like, fuck that. Then he eventually moved out anyway. He moved out to Southwest Philly, I think, with some actual, like, blood family members of his. He said, fuck that. He got out of that. But meanwhile, Mike joined the gang later on because at the time, he didn't want to go to the hall and all that either. he would go sometimes, but he really wasn't into it. But he was also tired of being starved out or whatever, so he joined the gang too, so that he could make money to kind of support himself, like buy himself stuff to eat, buy clothes or whatever. But over the next couple years, like a couple of his homies in the gang, they got shot up. You know what I mean? One got stabbed to death. A couple of them got locked up. Then he started seeing that this wasn't it. And this was around the time where I guess he started studying with, I'm trying to remember who he studied with at West Park. It wasn't Clayton, because Clayton was studying with a couple of other people. I'm trying to remember who was Mike studying with. Okay, that's right. He was Brother Geronimo Charleston. How could I forget that when those two were like freaking frat? But yeah, he was studying with Brother Geronimo Charleston. So he started taking his studies serious. Then was like he wanted to turn his life around. Started coming to the hall more and more. So, you know me, we took him under our wing, started inviting him out to play ball with us. You know what I mean? Bowling, just trying to like incorporate him and make him feel more welcome. Because I knew Mike ever since he was like 3 when his foster mother first brought him home. She eventually adopted him full time. But I remember Mike when he was like 3, 4, something like that. But by now he's like 16, about to turn 17. And he wants to turn his life around and dedicate his life to Jehovah and all that. So we kind of incorporated him into our circle. You know, he becomes an unbaptized publisher, joins a theocratic ministry school. He got baptized eventually a couple of years later. But before that, he tried to leave the gang, and the leader of the gang was like, nah, bro, you took a blood oath. You know how with a lot of gangs, you got to go through initiations and all that. So he had to go through all of that. Like, where he had to be jumped in. And I'm not really sure all of what he did, because he didn't disclose of everything. He used to try to imply to us that he had a couple bodies, but he never came out and said, oh, I got bodies. But the way he would talk, it was like it was real crafty. Like he would tell us he had bodies without telling us he had bodies. And you know, me being from the streets, you know, I resonate with that, and I can kind of tell when somebody's telling them doing dirt in the streets without actually incriminating themselves. But anyway, they was like, nah, once you get into this shit, you in it for life. They wasn't trying to hear about you trying to turn your life around for God or none of that shit. You know what I mean? They was threatening to end that cat's life. They was really threatening to end his life. But fortunately, a couple of my homies from back in my street running days, they were like OGs to the leader of the gang. Because the leader of the like t-shirt gang or whatever he was maybe a couple years, maybe a year to a couple years younger than me. So if at the time I'm 19, he was like probably 17 or 18. Most of the guys in the gang, they were they were like young. You know what I mean? They was like young, like maybe between the ages of 13 and 18. But the leader of the gang, he wasn't the oldest, but he was an OG to even some of the older members, because he had been wilding in the streets since he was like 7 or 8. You know, he too grew up in the system. You know what I mean? Both his parents were dead and gone. They were former drug addicts or whatever. So he had been wilding in the streets since he was a youngin'. But a couple of my homies from out on the south side of West Philly, they were OGs to him. So I went to my homies and was like, listen, I need to have a talk with him, whatever, because my young boy, he really wants to get out of this life and turn his life over to God or whatever, but they're giving him static, whatever. So the deal was, all right, we'll let Mike leave, but he has to pay a fee. You know what I mean? He has to pay a $500 fee to leave. I was like, all right, that ain't about shit. I told Mike, I said, you put up whatever money you can and the rest will be matched or whatever. Like whatever you don't have, the rest will be put up. So we put it up, but the deal was he always has to remain loyal to the Jehovah's Witnesses. And that was that. So I basically saved his life. So now let's fast forward a few years later, because this was 2003. Let's fast forward to 2008. At this time, I was on my way out of the J-Dubs. And by this time, Mike had moved up the J-Dub ladder. Like, he was a ministerial servant at this point. You know, so he started smelling himself and thinking that he could shit on me or whatever and talk to me any old way because I wasn't deemed spiritual, and that I was, according to him, that I was flirting with the dark side. So I had to remind him of why he's even in the position that he's in. Had to let him know, like, as a reminder. You know, and I also, last time I seen Mike, it was a few years ago. You know, he's a firefighter now. Last I've known, it's been a few years since I seen him. And when I seen him, he actually spoke. You know what I mean? We chopped it up for a couple minutes, telling me I need to leave for the dark side and come back to the light. And I said, Mike, the only reason why you still seeing the light is because I saved you from that darkness that you was in. So let's not forget. You know what I mean? Let's not forget. But Mike, you know what I mean, he was a funny addition to my crew. You know, him and Naraj, they would always get into it. See, Mike respected everybody else in the crew but Naraj. So they would go back and forth, and they both could rap, so they would both have little rap battles with each other, and Mike would always destroy him. Not that Dad didn't hold his own, but Mike was just a better freestyler. You know what I mean? And he had wittier rhymes and lyrics. So they would always get into it. I remember it got to the point where we was all like on a conference call, me, Sheaf, Naraj, Mike, and Naraj was talking dumb greasy to Mike, dumb greasy, saying he was like, you're adopted. Like he had to get you out that gang. You would have been dead, and you probably wouldn't. We wouldn't see you again to the new system. Just talking dumb greasy. Like, your mom wouldn't even feed you, so you had to go join a gang. You probably had to sell your booty. But man, he was saying a lot more, and Mike got so mad that he walked from 60th and Lansdowne all the way to Winfield Heights, where Naraj was staying. Now, at this time, the Hearns family, they were living in this gated community. And thinking back to this, I have another story for a later video when I also had to go into that gated community and remind Naraj of who the fuck I was. But anyway, meantime, Mike walked all the way to the gated community. But he couldn't get in, but that's how serious he was. And he was so mad that he couldn't get in. I'm like, man, it's probably a good thing you wouldn't, because the rage you had in you might have unalived boy. Because, man to man, Naraj really couldn't fuck with none of us in a fight. None of us. Sheaf used to toss him around like a rag doll. Naraj never wanted no smoke with me. He couldn't even go toe-to-toe with Lucius in a fight, even though him and Lucius actually never duked it out. But there's been times Lucius put his hands on him. But I think Mike was an unalived boy. But anyway, oh man, the memories. But anyway, this is just some Hawks Talking Squawk. Subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for more content. Hawk out.